appetite for horror.
Back in the 1500s, in the settlement of Crawlberg, an old Indian by the name of Feathercloud necromanced a turkey that would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. To kill.
Welcome to the podcast, Appetite for Horror, episode number 9. My name is Brando. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Jordan Downey. How are you, sir?
Thank you. I'm doing fantastic. Thank you.
Where are you located right now, if you don't mind me asking?
Los Angeles.
Okay. You say that with a little bit of a sigh, you know. Do you
No.
not like...
No. I do love living here. No, I don't know why I included the sigh. There's really no justification.
Well, we're going to get into a lot of your journey because you're originally from Ohio, at least if your website's correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I want to get along the whole journey because we were talking off the air. Yeah, I work for iHeartRadio. I have a Guns N' Roses podcast, but I really spend most of my time watching horror movies. Like it's most of my time. So it's kind of like, why didn't I start a horror? I think because there's so many horror podcasts out there, but I need to vent. I need to profess my love. So if you told me a few years ago I would be speaking with the director of Thankskilling, I would be shaking my head just like I am now. So I want to get to the journey before we get to the Thankskilling. So you're from Ohio. Is this something you always wanted to be, a filmmaker? Were you that little kid with a camcorder, getting your neighborhood friends, putting fake blood on them? Like, what was your childhood like? What's the young mind that created Thankskilling like?
Yeah, more or less, I would say, this is what I always wanted to do. There was, I think at one point I was just like any kid, maybe you're really into dinosaurs, you're into space travel or anything like that. I was really into construction vehicles and construction work in general, probably because I grew up, like you said, in Ohio, but kind of out in the country on a small farm. It wasn't a farm as in we were growing crops and growing the vegetables that we were going to eat, like Little House on the Prairie or anything like that. It was just that it was a farm that my dad wanted to have this property. My mom and dad, they wanted to have, a farm property where they could have animals and where we could have space and tractors and stuff. So I grew up around all of that, and we would have like our pond, we didn't have a pond at one point in the field. So we had a pond dug out. So I became obsessed with construction in general and, backhoes and bulldozers and all that stuff. Long story short, other than filmmaking, as odd as this sounds, that's the only other thing that I think I ever, as a child, associated a career with, was like, oh, I'll drive bulldozers and backhoes and trucks and just anything with heavy machinery always like interested me. But at some point then around, at the same exact time, I was watching movies nonstop. Like you let off by just saying you're such a horror fan, you're always watching horror movies. Same for me. I had an older brother who managed video stores. He would always have screeners in obscure horror movie screeners because those are the ones that weren't necessarily getting released in video stores. So he would bring kind of the scraps home, and I would just see these weird covers, and he was collecting cutouts from newspapers and magazines of anything horror and science fiction. So I was just kind of really drawn to that and watching those movies nonstop. Flash forward a few years later, some friends of mine, had a camcorder. Their parents had an old VHS camcorder, and they were kind of making home movies, and I sort of watched them do it. And then I spent the night at their place once and made movies with them. But I was very young and had never, my family didn't have cameras or anything. They weren't into photography or art or anything like that. So I just knew that I loved movies, but I didn't really know anything about making movies until this friend had a camcorder, and then I started messing around with that. And then eventually led to exactly what you said, where I bought my own camera and started making movies with family and friends. And that was mostly all of, late middle school and high school that I was starting to do it. And then at that point, then once you're in high school, you're of course then thinking about your future, and you go to college, military, just all the options on the table. And for me, there was never a detour to any other kind of career other than just, I want to work in the film industry. I want to do this for the rest of my life. and it will probably involve horror, science fiction, genre stuff that I love.
You didn't want to make films about like Tonka trucks. You didn't want to go that route, construction, how-to videos. You went into horror. I guess which I guess
Yeah.
we all appreciate. Do you remember those first few films that kind of shaped your brain? Because to this day, I mean, for me, I've said it on each podcast, is I still kill because it's perfect for you. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. It's so I always had that love for the B movie kind of horror. So what were your first horror movies that still stick with you today?
Critters by far, which is my favorite movie of all time. And I'm not going to say Critters is the best movie ever made. I'm just saying that that's my favorite.
Sure.
And that B horror, and why is it my favorite? Well, the first film takes place in a small town and on a farm. I think I related to that. In fact, I was actually just back in Ohio in the fall visiting my dad and walking around the town that I grew up in and looking at, in Critters 2, there's a grain mill and they're kind of more in the actual town and not just on the outskirts on the farm. But both Critters and Critters 2, I watched relentlessly over and over as a kid. And I started to think about, because I never really processed why I would have been drawn to those movies, because I love the genre mashup and all of the elements in them. I love the bounty hunter characters. But walking around town, I started to spot so many things that I was like, yeah, that's kind of something from Critters. And I just subconsciously grew up in, I think, an atmosphere that I felt I could relate to, but then there was the horror science fiction element that got dropped into this very relatable situation for me. So I probably was really drawn to those because I could relate to them, even though I wasn't thinking about it like that at the time. So certainly those movies, and then James Cameron stuff. I mean, I have this picture that there was this museum in Columbus called COSI, and they brought in like a movie prop exhibit once, kind of like how museums have traveling exhibits. And there was a movie prop one, and they had an aliens roped off area, and they had the power loader that Ripley was in. They had a queen alien and a lot of the props from the actual movies. And there's this picture of my dad holding me, and I'm very young, under 5. And they're all posing facing the camera, and I'm totally just turned around looking at the queen alien behind me. And I love it because it just totally captures me and my obsession. And so Aliens and Terminator 2, anything that was dark and drippy and slimy and scary and practical effects, which obviously at the time there wasn't an alternative to that, but just all of that, like the covers for those movies are ingrained in my head. And those types of 80s horror films and late 80s and early 90s especially are the ones that really cemented my love for that genre.
Right on. And we're going to talk about, because I love practical effects over CGI every single time. But I guess while we're on the subject of Critters, I know this is quite a leap forward. You did, I mean, is it, for lack of a better phrase, a fan film? Because it's it's a motion picture in 6 minutes, essentially. Critters, Bounty Hunter. It was done a few years ago. Where is that now? Because it never came to fruition. It was, tell me about how, because it's, again, really well done. I wish it was longer. I want it to be a full movie. Yeah,
me too. I mean, so obviously, I am a fan of the series and always followed over the years. I mean, Critters 4, that was 91, 92. So there was a huge gap of time. That this is also pre-internet. So right when I'm going through high school, middle school, college, and the internet and IMDb and just in general search engines and blogs and people that would come together through the internet to talk about movies that didn't really exist when I was growing up watching Critters at the beginning, I would always sort of venture onto those forums and just try to find out, is there ever going to be another, Critters film? Are they going to try and make another one? Would they remake it? I'm not a huge fan of remakes and just in general. I mean, there's some great ones, don't get me wrong, but just in general, the idea to just go towards a remake as opposed to something original doesn't always interest me. But I always figured, well, if there was one thing that I would ever want to remake, it would be Critters, because it means so much. So I all that to say, I was just a fan and was following online any type of news that would ever pop up, anything Critters related, which was dormant for years and there was no news. But I read one day that they were going to make a web series. Warner Brothers was going to make a web series for Critters. So I started trying to scrounge around to see who was involved, how could I pitch myself as a director. But I'd only done Thankskilling and Thankskilling 3 at that point, which aren't necessarily tonally totally different from Critters, but also were very low budget and corny and not really the serious tone that I feel like that movie would have needed. And so I couldn't really track down a whole lot of information, but I figure I needed to go out and make something to try and throw my name in the hat to get the web series job, to get their attention. So I went out and made that short film that you're referencing, Critters Bounty Hunter, for just a couple grand, with just a couple friends, you know, the same group of people that Kevin and Ricky, that we made the Thankskilling movies and then the Headhunter with, same team, same mentality of just go out and do something if you want to do it and if you believe in it, and put it together in very quick time. I think it was Halloween. I had the sort of idea of like, okay, let's go and do this. And by Christmas, it was on YouTube. And so,
wow.
I think part of why that speed was, you know, possible is because it was based on pre-existing work. So I didn't have to create something from the ground up. I already knew how this monster would work and what it would look like and all of that. So I give credit to the people who already paved that way for me. But yeah, I guess you'd call it a fan film, a short film, whatever you want to call it. It's on YouTube right now. It did get, as far as I know, you know, it's hard to get true answers about half this stuff, but as far as I know, it did get to them, but then nothing ever came about it, and they went and, you know, made whatever they've made since then. But I love that short. It was a lot of fun to make, and certainly it didn't kill my interest in wanting to do something bigger with that. It just made me more excited about it.
Wow, because that really, a lot of questions went through my mind when I was watching that, because in addition to, it's just a very cool short horror film that it just looks like it took longer than from Halloween to Christmas and what goes into that. So it is fascinating. So maybe let's take a few steps back, because by this time you're obviously a professional filmmaker, but Thankskilling happened when you were in college. So I guess how do you look at that? Because you can be professional, I guess, is a fluid term. You know, you don't have to graduate college to be a professional. But so what was the mindset? Because South Park, their first South Park episode, it came out in college, but that wasn't the South Park yet. It wasn't as we know it today. So what was the mindset going into Thankskilling? Because again, killer clowns, I look for the most obscure horror movies, you know, about killer donuts and killer sofas and beds that eat, all these things. So, you know, I can't believe there wasn't one made, because they do this for all holidays and things like that. There wasn't a Thankskilling movie like the one that you made. So please tell me about this this legendary cult film.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, you said that like you couldn't believe that, like, oh, if I had set out to make a horror podcast and I'd talk to the Thankskilling guy, you know, a few short years later, I wouldn't have ever believed, if someone had said when we were setting out to make Thankskilling, anyone would want to talk about it on a podcast a few short years later, let alone it's been, you know, over 10 years since we've made and released that movie. So it's crazy to us, the life that it has had, because backing up, we never really envisioned that. You know, we just wanted to go and make something that would make us laugh and that would scratch this very specific itch that we would have as horror fans, which is these sort of so bad it's good, these cheesy covers, these B horror movies that are really beyond obscure, that have some kind of central villain that is just totally ridiculous, whether it's a talking, you know, gingerbread cookie, or it's a sofa, like you said, or any of these things. And so I think that where it came from, and I've talked about this a lot, but briefly, it's simply that we have been making a lot of short films at that time, because you're in film school. So it's like, make this short and work on this short. And I think we were just kind of had short film fatigue. And there's a certain challenge in making a feature film, that especially for the first time, because it's kind of like the goal that, right, if you're making shorts or you're an aspiring director or writer, you're always working towards just making a feature film, or TV, I suppose, if you want to go that route. But that was like this pie in the sky goal, make a feature film. So one summer, Kevin and I were actually in the spring when we were juniors at LMU, which is Loyola Marymount University in LA, where we met. And when I say Kevin, I mean Kevin Stewart, who we made Thankskilling together. We were just like, let's go make a feature. And what would it be? And we were consuming South Park at the time, and Family Guy, and Wonder Shows, and in TV Funhouse, and like just more of the like R-rated, I guess, kind of animation, and just the obscure stuff that was finding its way on the internet then, especially viral type stuff. And so those were the things that we were laughing at, and at the same time also laughing at and enjoying these cheesy horror films. So it was just in our DNA at that time. I think Thankskilling is very much a product of who we were at that point in our lives, and also my interests and Kevin's interests growing up and watching the kinds of horror films we're talking about. So once we said, let's go make a feature, I don't think we ever really considered doing anything other than a horror movie. And then just like you said, you know, there hadn't been a Thanksgiving slasher. I mean, I know there was some others, but they weren't the ones that just sort of like owned that holiday and like really like built it into the plot and brought a turkey in there and it was talking. And the moment that we were in the kitchen in our apartment, we were like, oh, what if the turkey says gobble, gobble, motherfucker? I think we were like, how can we not make this movie now? No matter how it turns out, no matter where it goes or how much money we spend or don't spend or who we cast in this, we have to make that now, because it's just something that I would have wanted to have rented and, you know, and enjoyed myself. And away we went. Then, so in between our junior and senior years, we went back to Ohio. We shot it in 11 days for $3,500, which basically went to food and some special effects and just some costumes. But, you know, it was incredibly cheap, which is another reason why it's crazy to be talking about it now, because most movies that cost $3,500 don't even get distribution, let alone have any kind of a lifespan. But that's the genesis of it. And then everything that happened after that is a series of events that luck, or it's not all luck, because we certainly put a ton of time into the marketing and trying to cultivate a fan base by connecting with people, by coming up with mailing lists and bizarre strategies of like mailing people gravy flavored condoms, just anything we could do to try and drum up interest and press. So we really kind of like tried to nurture it and turn it into something. But also there's a lot of luck in terms of just where it landed and getting on Netflix in the early days, and getting the exposure needed, I suppose, for people to even discover this thing.
I think that was the first time that I saw it, was on Netflix. I know it's on Tubi now. It makes the rounds and everything. And it reminded me, like, the first time, because my previous guest was Jason Yashanin from Poultrygeist.
Oh, okay.
And that was also early Netflix. And that, because it reminded me of Trauma, because that's a trauma film, and yours is very trauma-ish, where it's over the top blood, guts, and sex. You know, it's so where does that line? Because you can have killer turkey, but then sorry, spoiler alert, that he can bang girls too. Like, where does that come from? And are you able to keep it together on set? Like 11 days, maybe that would have been a week if you guys weren't laughing so much. Could I say that?
Oh, we were laughing a ton. I mean, I think the spirit of Thankskilling, that if you watch it and you enjoy it, it's because we were all enjoying making it. It really wasn't like a slog to get through. There was certainly stuff in the movie that I think there was parts of us that were a little like hesitant about. Is this what are we gonna really put this in the movie? And what is this gonna do to us? Not necessarily like career-wise, but just, is this what we want to make as a feature film and then release? And I think there was always a bit of us thinking, oh, well, maybe we just won't release this movie. You know, it'll just be a fun college thing. But we certainly had a lot of fun making it. And yeah, we were laughing all the time because I was doing the turkey's voice and puppeteering it on set. So, you know, when he takes one thing, I remember we just like did over and over because we were laughing so much. When he takes the hat off and she's like, oh, you got a haircut. That was hilarious because I had this stupid glove. We couldn't afford anything else. So I've got one of those like bright yellow kitchen gloves that you wear when you're doing the dishes.
Yeah.
And got like turkey feathers and just hot glued them onto the gloves so that I could kind of like I could grab stuff as if I were the turkey, but you'd only see a little thin layer of the turkey feather. So trying to like pull this hat off and get it in the frame. Kevin's laughing because he's looking at the monitor. So he's seeing, I'm not ever seeing what's on screen because we just had this one little camcorder. That was hilarious. The stuff with the sheriff at the table where they're drinking coffee was also, my whole family was around and we were all in tears that day. And at some point too, you know, the hours wore on, and even though it was 11 days, we were shooting 7 days a week, just around the clock. And, you know, we'd shoot during the day, then Kevin and I would plan that night and stay up and sleep on the couch or wherever we were crashing, you know, whatever house we were crashing at. And so we were kind of delirious too. So at some point we're just kind of like, oh my God. I think that the scene when they pull over and they go into the woods and have a campfire, they have like a cooler of beer in there. And I don't even know what, it was probably whatever the cheapest beer we could find. And but we were kind of like drinking that beer throughout the rest of the shoot. Not like there wasn't a lot, but so I think there was a bit of us that were like, we're delirious. It's 4 a.m. We're drinking this lukewarm leftover campfire beer that's over here. We were all just kind of like out of our minds in a way that probably, you know, led to some extra humor in the movie. But yeah, we did have a very good time making it. And all of the ideas, you know, where does it come from? Combination of just us being huge horror fans and knowing that all of the different sort of staples and tropes of a horror film, and especially the 5 teenagers on college break, going to a lake, going to the woods, just the slasher formula, we knew so well, so we could pick it apart. And oh yeah, they find, you know, I think it was Friday the 13th too, they find the Camp Crystal Lake sign in the woods, and so we find a Kralberg sign in over here. And all of those things we were just plucking from other things, and then trying to figure out, okay, how could we sort of reverse this a little bit, that you would be so oblivious and so stupid that you wouldn't even recognize that it's a turkey wearing a human's face, the way that you wouldn't recognize the disguise of a slasher in another film. And just using those things to play up the humor is all we were doing.
That scene, I had re-watched it to prepare for this interview, and she's looking down at her dad, which is the turkey. Dad, are you okay? It's just wearing a human face, and just the silliness, the absurdity of it is what makes it great. But what also makes it great, of course, is the horror aspect of it. And I want to ask about the practical effects. What scene was most challenging to film? Because again, you didn't spend a lot of money at all. So, but you got really creative. So how did you get creative, let's say, with like, you know, the turkey going through another guy, you know, going through one of the characters' bodies? How does that happen?
Yeah, the practical effects came down to, so we did find a guy who I worked with a few times after that, Troy Smith, and he went to the Tom Savini School in Pennsylvania, and we were lucky because he was living in Ohio at the time. So I believe we just found him through Craigslist when we were just trying to cast and find any crew that could contribute to this. And Troy popped up, and so he ended up doing a good amount of the effects. Like he sculpted that whole chest rig that you're talking about when the turkey pops out. He did the face that comes off. He did, like, there was a slit throat. He did the heart that gets plucked out. He did a lot of those, like basically those prosthetics, the custom ones that we needed for the movie. The turkey, I sculpted that and made that because I had a little bit of experience and interest in special effects myself. In college, I was kind of the go-to horror guy for any of the short films that needed blood or prosthetics. I was the guy that would do that stuff just because I liked horror and I was interested in creating creatures and different blood gags and stuff. So I was kind of a little bit used to it myself. And so I had some materials enough and then just enough, you know, knowledge to make that turkey as rubber as it looks. The hardest thing, yeah, I mean, the coming out of the chest, I think was us. That was kind of like, okay, how can we do something that's kind of like the chest burster in Alien, a classic horror film, but in a ridiculous manner, that the turkey, that there really there's no logic to, you know, how the turkey would get in this guy's stomach from it. a cartoon thing. Just that the same way that there's not a logic to the Leprechaun movies, right? He gets inside, he does, there's magic. And so it's just kind of whatever. There's an ancient curse. The turkey's allowed to do whatever we think is appropriate on any given scene. That one was tricky though, because we had to shoot that. The close-ups of the chest rig of the shotgun kind of shooting through it, that was actually a real shotgun that we took. The prop that they used in the movie is a real shotgun. That was the gun I grew up, using for target practice, my dad's shotgun, which is just like a single load, single barrel. And we actually took that out into the backyard and shot through the front of that prosthetic. So for the close-ups, that's actually a long lens, really zoomed in and very carefully, obscured onto the side, a gun really shooting through it, which I don't think I would do that again. But, when you've got no money and we're
sure, yeah,
in Ohio.
Yeah, not after the Rust situation. I don't think you would do that.
No,
right.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So anyways, that was that. And then we just had to carefully position them sort of at, on a profile angle so that I could actually push the turkey along the backside of Aaron, the actor, to have the turkey's head go through the front of the chest and then flip it upside down to say the line. So it's just careful camera angles for that one. The other ones, with the plucking out of the heart, same thing, just, the turkey banging into the chest and then carefully switching the angle to a fake dummy that looks like then his beak is going deeper into the chest cavity, but it's not actually the actor at that point in time. I wouldn't say any one of the effects from recollection was that much more time consuming. Probably in general as a whole, the turkey was the hardest, just because you had to constantly frame out my body or wherever the puppet was. So we originally imagined like he had legs we kind of bought these fake turkey legs, and we imagined seeing a lot more of the full body of him, or maybe even trying to find ways to get him to move. But we didn't even have figured out, like we did for Thankskilling 3, where we're on sort of like those mechanic dollies that you see a mechanic roll under the hood of a car. We didn't even have wheels under me. So the turkey in the first movie never moves more than just whatever could be bounced into frame. It never like glides along, or there's no blocking whatsoever. It was just me laying in position, the turkey there, and it just says his lines and is very static. That was hard. It's just trying to figure out how to get it to sit in these positions. And it's incredibly uncomfortable because it is sitting at the dinner table, but that means I'm under the dinner table, reaching up for long periods of time with no monitor and trying to dip a beak into a cup of coffee. It's like, it's a guessing game. So in general, that was the hardest puppet stuff.
Well, that's why you're the director. You're able to pull these things off. But you mentioned Thankskilling 3. Now, I've never done acid. I feel like I've done acid after watching Thankskilling 3. I mean, it's such a departure in a lot of different ways. And we should acknowledge it. The people who don't know, and that's going to be a follow-up question, there's no Thankskilling 2, because there's a kind of to be continued, turkeys in space after the first one. And the third one is like, we got to find Thankskilling 2. And so, yeah, can you tell me about like the whole mindset going into Thankskilling 3? Because it is way more of a comedy than a horror, and a lot of more puppets. And it's just it's a different film. It's not the slasher film. So, yeah, I don't even, again, I just feel like I did drugs after watching it. Can you tell me more about T3?
Yeah, T3. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think, again, that's kind of a product of our time. And yeah, it's like, I've never done acid and hard drugs like that either. I think that it would have just been, No, I know. But I totally get that. I mean, there's literally, we put this in there very purposefully. The opening title, or the opening company logo for the fake Thankskilling 2 is like this company that we came up with called Tryptodyne, which is Cyberdyne meets tryptophan. Yeah. It's not that complicated. And there's like a needle, the logo has a syringe going into an arm. And then at the end, the syringe is coming out. And that's just be like, get ready, because this is going to be a crazy trip. I don't know where we got on the idea of like, let's make this significantly more. I mean, the first one doesn't really hint at this psychedelic sort of aspect to this franchise at all or anything like that. So I don't know exactly where we got on that. I think it was just one of those things that we didn't want to do the exact same thing, which is a blessing and a curse, right? And certainly now looking back with a little bit more years, I'll go and watch, I did a marathon of watching all the Friday the 13th films when there was a Friday the 13th a few weeks ago.
Sure.
And you really start to get, I'd never thought about this at the time really. And I've learned a lot about just like that, what you come to expect from a franchise, right? What's the comfort food of a certain franchise? Now, Thankskilling only making one movie, I don't think that you're not talking about a franchise, but I don't think that we thought that this would be something we wanted to turn into a comfort food type of scenario where you're just like, okay, the turkey comes back and kills more college kids and it's next Thanksgiving break. I think that in retrospect, that's probably what people would prefer, and that is typically what these franchises want to settle into, because by the time you get to Jason Goes to Hell, you're kind of like, and they try to do something new, it's off-putting because it's not what you've come to expect. And so I think we did such a departure because I think we didn't want to necessarily fall into a groove of just making these because we just had other interests in kinds of movies that we wanted to make. And so I'm not to say that we were trying to sabotage or anything. I just think that we wanted to do something very different. And also we wanted to see if could you give people kind of an unexpected experience from something like this? Could we elevate the production value? Could we skip to part 3? Could you do something with a really micro budget B horror film that was totally DIY, independently produced and released, that you would expect, oh, they're going to do Thankskilling 2 in space. They're going to do they're going to just, rehash the same thing. But usually those little movies don't try and do something bigger or elevate. And I think we were we thought that might be a unique opportunity to try to elevate that, whether that worked or not. I think that was our mindset. And the skipping to part 3 thing, I think, was simply us just saying, how do we stand out again? We made the killer turkey horror movie that didn't really have a ton of competition as far as what it would take to get a Thanksgiving horror film, to sort of become aware to horror films. And I think to horror fans. And I think we just felt well, if we skip that, going straight to part 3 is another little marketing trick that would just get attention and get us to, get eyes on it again. So all of that culminated to the entire kitchen sink sort of approach that Thankskilling 3 became.
Wow. Yeah, that when you explain it like that, I think that's why I asked. That is why I asked, because that just, you would not guess that kind of mindset goes into Thankskilling 3, and I really do respect that. And that comes, you could tell that you're a student of the genre, and you're also trying to learn more and expand and do other things and not be. So that is really it is fascinating. And I mentioned, of course, all the laughing you did on the first one. The third one, though, where again it's so many jokes, was it ad-libbed, a lot of it? Because a lot of it reminded me of Rick and Morty, where I don't know if it's ad-libbed or you're trying different things and you're keeping that, or is there a set script? Because that seems as much fun as you could tell you guys had on the first one. The third one just seems like it's a love letter of everyone involved. It just seems like you guys are just having the best time on there through puppets. Of course, there are physical, real people there as well, but just the back and forths, the jokes. It just seems like, I don't know. You tell me if that was scripted or what.
There was more of Thankskilling had a script, but and a lot of the stuff that's in there actually is in the script for Thankskilling. But part 3, we worked on more. I think there was more of an attempt at kind of at writing Thankskilling 3 to be a little bit more of a standard film with a little bit more of a standard structure. And that was to try and even out the puppet heavy approach so that it maybe felt like it was a little bit more of an adventure film that you'd seen before, something like Dark Crystal or Labyrinth, where you're going through all these worlds and meeting all these characters along your journey. So that was purposeful. But yeah, we were definitely laughing a lot. Although I will say Thankskilling 3 is by far the hardest thing that I've made yet of all shorts and features,
Wow.
because the amount of puppets, and it wasn't just one puppet, it was multiple puppets talking. And in some scenes it's puppets riding puppets. And it was like the amount of complicated scenarios we put ourselves in, trying to create a vortex, which is all VFX, but then there's puppets on puppets. I mean, we would have pulley systems mounted to the ceiling to try and get fishing lines hidden so that we could raise things up. And then I'm sneaking a hand into puppeteer. It wasn't just me now doing puppeteering. Kevin was puppeteering. Sometimes we'd have 3 or 4. At one point, Ricky, our producer, was operating some kind of a puppet. We had to have our editor, Alan, come out and man the camera. We were just like all hands on deck to try and bring that one to life, because it was so puppet heavy, which was purposeful. We wanted to do a Jim Henson sort of an R-rated, kind of acid trip version of a Jim Henson film. Meet the Feebles was a huge inspiration to me as a kid, because that movie was off limits to me. I was not allowed to watch these puppets that I was watching on Sesame Street do vulgar R-rated things. And so I think there was a part of me inspired by like, okay, well, if it was off limits, then wait till I'm gonna make one.
Okay.
But yeah, it was fun because there was ad lib, and certainly there were a lot of scenes that we went off the rails with, but it was also incredibly complicated. That's probably my overall, like, thinking back to Thankskilling 3 was how difficult it was. And in some ways it probably would have benefited from not being as complex, because I would have been able to have a little bit more of a taken a step back as just a director looking at the big picture of like, okay, can we take the insanity that this movie is, but just maybe streamline it a little bit and gut it, cut 20 minutes out of the movie and just make it a little bit more palatable to people, as opposed to getting so ingrained in how to pull off something. But it's kind of like, well, why are we trying to pull this off in the first place? So it was a fantastic learning lesson, for many different reasons, from the production side, the release side, the reasons to make the movie side, all of it. But there were certainly a lot of fun times, and it lasted a lot longer. The first one we did in 11 days. Thankskilling 3 was spread out over the course of a year, where we shot like a big chunk of stuff in December, and then we went and shot another big chunk in February, March. There was like 50 plus days of shooting when we added it all up. So just very complex for what that movie is.
I have like such a new appreciation for that film. Again, why I'm asking why I wanted to talk to you, to know what goes behind it, because you could tell, there's a lot of craziness going on, but behind the scenes, I want to know about that craziness. That's why we're talking. So with those lessons, then do you have any aspirations to do a Thankskilling 2, or are you going to skip ahead to do a Thankskilling 12, or is this franchise done? Where are we with Thankskilling?
I don't know. Well, I mean, I'll never say never, because we used to joke when we were making the first one that we're like, oh, one day we'll remake Thankskilling for $1 million, which isn't even that much money to make a movie with. But in movie terms, it's not that much. But I think the joke being that we'll make this for $3,000 and then we'll remake it for $1 million one day. I don't think that right now, where things are, that I would really be that interested in kind of going back into the Thankskilling world. I do think that we talked a lot about at the time how what I always wanted to do with it, and maybe I should have, or maybe it's not too late, but what I always thought would be cool is to essentially make a sequel each year or every couple of years, but let new filmmakers direct and write each one, but they would be college students. And so it would basically be like, give people a smaller, a smallish budget, let's just say under $100,000 instead of $3,000, but essentially just give people an opportunity the way that we sort of gave ourselves an opportunity at the same age and experience level we were when we made the first movie. And let this kind of just be this weird training ground for young filmmakers to just make these silly movies that all have to have, interest in the horror and whatnot, but that you would make a sequel every couple of years, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to however many you could go. And that they would all be made by young college students, just going out and shooting them the way that they would want to shoot them, and only keeping a few things consistent as far as the turkey and whatnot. So basically like a very DIY version of Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th, the way those, or Saw now, with slashers that just keep churning out sequels. I thought it would be cool to do a really small, independently produced version of one of those larger horror franchises. But the reason that we never really did a whole lot of that is just that when it is independently produced in DIY, that means you're incredibly hands-on. It's very hard to just sort of pass the reins to other people and just expect that someone will go and make something, and to not be involved in getting stuff set up. And especially then when we're trying to make other films, writing other scripts in the background, it just was so time consuming to put into Thankskilling when really our hearts were kind of pulling us in a different direction. So is it dead? I'll never say never, but we certainly don't have any plans to do anything with it at this point in time.
I gotcha. I do like that idea though of kind of a franchised to college, Thankskilling 101, that you can take. I do like, because it stays true to the roots of what this was and the success that it became. So I do, that's very creative, and I do like that. I want to talk about also, I haven't seen it yet. It's on Amazon, I believe, but that's the Headhunter, because that's why I'm surprised, because that looks like so much went into that. It's such a different looking film than the Thankskillings. And you mentioned how just hard Thankskilling 3 was. The Headhunter looked like it was hard to make. So can you just talk about that film a little bit?
Yeah, it was hard to make, but I think that there was a certain reward in that we were doing something totally different that was exciting to us. And yeah, the Headhunter is very different. So, I mean, in between, after Thankskilling 3, then we made the Critters short. There was another couple of shorts thrown in the mix, and in between all of this stuff, we're writing scripts and pitching ideas and just trying to constantly get stuff going. And the Headhunter came about in so many ways, even though they look nothing alike, their stories are nothing alike, the tones are nothing alike. The Headhunter and Thankskilling are very tied together for multiple reasons. First and foremost, because of the approach to how you make the feature film, which is just, you have to have a burning desire to go and make something because you feel like you're not being given an opportunity to do so. So you have to create your own opportunity. Feeling like, oh, let's just go out and, we wanted to be filmmakers. Like, I don't want to just sit around and constantly be trying to convince people to give us money. Let's just pull together the resources, the friends, the connections, the equipment, whatever we've got, and wherever our interests lie in coming and crafting a story, let's just go out and make it happen. So the Headhunter, and that it was involving, again, Kevin, who I wrote Thankskilling with, who we wrote the Headhunter with. He was the DP on Thankskilling, DP on Headhunter. We both produced them. So the same core group of people made both things with the same exact spirit going into it. But the other interesting thing is that the Headhunter was also very low budget. That was made for $30,000.
Okay.
So it's lower budget than Thankskilling 3, actually, by a decent amount. And
wow,
it doesn't look it.
Nope.
The experience that we had gone through with making all of the practical effects, knowing how puppets kind of like to be shot or don't like to be shot in terms of hiding strings and rods and hands and making them fall into shadows in the right kind of way. I think all of that experience allowed us to do the Headhunter for a similarly tiny budget, but make it look dark and macabre and tonally very serious compared to those movies. But the other thing is that, so the movie was very cheap, but we actually funded like half of it or a third of it we sold a bunch of props from Thankskilling and Thankskilling 3 on eBay.
Okay.
At one point, because they were just being stored in an apartment closet. And so we were like, we don't really have the space to keep all of this stuff. So we're like, well, let's, let the fans have it and put it out there.
Pass on like a dead turkey puppet to your children. You don't want to do that.
Well, we kept the turkey head, and we do have some of the good stuff, but there were so many things that we were okay with parting with some of them. So literally, because of Thankskilling and it finding its own audience and success, helped pave the way for us to pay for half of or a third of the Headhunter. So all of the experience that those movies prior had given us allowed us to go and do the Headhunter, which Yeah, since you haven't seen it, well, we can save that conversation for another time. But more or less, it's a medieval warrior in kind of the Dark Ages, and he's a very lonely kind of guy living on the outskirts of a kingdom, and he's collecting a bunch of severed heads from creatures, and you see him bringing these heads back to his cabin and pounding them, through the forehead with a wooden stake and mounting them on his wall, kind of as his very gory hunting trophy collection. But there's only one monster that he really, really wants, and it's the one that killed his daughter years ago, which is not a spoiler because it's in the log line for the movie. But
Yes.
and then things go wrong once he does get his second chance. And so that one came about because I love movies that are these sort of solitary type of characters. I don't feel like every movie needs to have a lot of dialogue. I love visually told stories, and I think that there was just a lot of interest in us kind of, can we make an entire feature about one guy, but not in the way you're used to seeing that, where it would be somebody in a coffee shop or a drama about someone in their apartment, but something that was that sort of indie spirit of that type of a character, but put it into a horror fantasy world that makes it more engaging. Because I feel like that genre stuff, whether it's horror, sci-fi, fantasy, anything, that they just tend to have such spectacle to them, where you feel like, oh, well, we have to show dragons and we have to show, grand war scenes. And if we can't do that, let's not make a movie in that time period. And I don't really subscribe by those rules. I sort of feel like I wish there were more things, small stories in big worlds. And so The Headhunter was born out of that. And we just went and put it together the way we know how. We got a great actor, Chris, who was from Norway, and he met us in Portugal, which is where Kevin's family is from. And so we were able to shoot in kind of family-owned private locations and properties, and got a great actor, and away we went. But yeah, it was a lot of work, but it wasn't, I don't know. I don't feel like there was many instances of just banging our heads against the wall in frustration. It was very much more the case of, we would take a shot at doing something or putting something together, and more often than not, it was coming out the way we wanted. And we didn't feel like we needed more money or more people to help us pull it off. It very much was, we were hitting the mark we were aiming at.
You obviously have a very learned approach to directing. You're not out there just to make a movie. There's so much of into just Thankskilling, how much passion and intelligence goes into it, which is just the ironic thing. If you watch Thankskilling, 1 and 3, you're just like, intelligence. There's intelligence. That's why I love horror, because there is, even in the most schlocky horror films, there is a subtle intelligence to it. To go back, did you learn any of this? What did you learn from interning under Wes Craven? Right, that you went to intern. That's wow. Like, so how much time did you spend with him? What is that like? Is he a teacher? Like, how does that work to intern under the famous director Wes Craven?
Well, it probably sounds, that probably sounds more glamorous than it actually was. I was an intern at his production company, and that involved answering the phone, reading scripts and writing coverage, copying scripts and having things laid out for when they had writers coming in, just general office, and clerical type stuff, intern work. So swap out Wes Craven for any other, company, and it would have been a very similar line of duty. Now, the difference being is that the people that would come through would be horror writers and filmmakers, and the posters on the walls were horror related, and just, it was in the world that I really liked. But I wished I could say that I felt like I had hands-on teaching from Wes Craven, and not to say that he wouldn't be that kind of a guy. It's just that my job did not cross paths with him in that kind of way. But I did meet him a couple times. He was very kind, very generous with, with visiting and just sitting down and saying hi and introducing himself. And it was really cool to just be, and it was very important for me to see, I think, that side of the business, because I was just like experiencing the film school side of things, which is the terminology for all of the lights and the grip equipment and cameras and lenses and all the production, the very like blue collar side of filmmaking, which is just that, you know, that manual labor side of making movies was much more what I was accustomed to in school and working on stuff outside of school. So then to be in the wear a nice outfit, you're in the air conditioned office, you've got a valet parking, and like that side of things was new to me. And I think it was really important for me to see that side of things too. And I grew up a very shy kind of kid. So to be forced into the first line of defense as a phone call when someone's trying to get a hold of Wes Craven probably also made me get out of that shell a little bit. So yeah, I wish that I could say that I was on set and I'm learning the tricks of the trade from the master, but I wasn't. I'd be lying if I said I did, but I certainly was, you know, I certainly appreciated being in that environment and getting to be around them and see how they carried themselves in a very professional sort of way in terms of dealing with other writers and filmmakers and agents on the phone and stuff like that. But it was that side of him and not his blood and guts making
Gotcha.
scream side.
Gotcha. No, right on. And I've done the same thing in radio, you know, the blue collar stuff with the audio editing and being on the air and all that. But I've sat in the front desk and answered phones. I've done everything in radio, and to learn that side of it, you know, if they're going to complain about a song on the radio that I have no control over, you know, I'm answering the phones. So I think that helps you. I'm sure it did. It helps you kind of formulate your entire opinion, your entire persona as a director, or, you know, whatever you want to call me, producer, going forward, because you get to see at all angles, which is, I guess, what a director does anyway. What are you working on now? What can we look forward to from Jordan Downey?
Got a bunch of scripts. One of them that's, I mean, nothing that I can announce or say, you know, and nothing that I'm not sitting on a finished film and on a hard drive yet. As far as that something is imminently going to be released. One I'm crazy about is the thing that I've not believed in a project, you know, more than this one. Kevin and I wrote it during the pandemic, draft after draft. We have a really great producer attached, and it's now with a company we're just starting to make offers to cast. So basically, once the film will get financed, once we get the right actor attached to play the lead role. And then hopefully maybe we'll be shooting this fall. That one is kind of got its own trajectory. There's another script that we finished in the fall that's even a little bit higher budget than that one. And that one's sort of starting to make the rounds. And then I'm working on, even just this afternoon after this, I'm going to get back to the script. There's another smaller one, because I kind of really believe that like you probably should have two kind of parallel versions of your filmmaking career going. And there's sort of okay, these ones require bigger budgets, which means it requires teams of people and permission and green lights, and it requires a system of financing and of actors and all of that stuff to just get a film made. But there's another side of me that I don't ever want to lose sight of, and that is I got to go make a movie because I love making movies and I want to just contribute cool ideas to the world. And so that can be done on a smaller scale. The ones that we can give permission to ourselves to make, because we can either fund them ourselves, or they're much more within reach as far as getting the financing to make a movie. Very similar to the Thankskilling and Headhunter. And so the one I'm working on that's kind of in that range is very much like the Headhunter, except not medieval, but in a sci-fi world. So the idea of sort of a character that we've kind of seen before that finds themselves into a situation on the outskirts of a giant sci-fi landscape, because I love movies like Starship Troopers and Edge of Tomorrow and just that world. But like I was saying earlier, I think that people tend to always gravitate towards, if you're going to make a movie in that world, it has to be massive in scope. And I think it'd be really cool to make something that is a very small character film with that in the background. And so that's kind of what I'm working on now. So whether the sci-fi thing or the other one that's, you know, going out to actors, which is horror, is one of those will happen this fall. And so it's just kind of me moving both along and figuring out which one makes more sense. Yeah.
Awesome. So what's the best way to keep in contact and to see what is to come? Going to your website, jordan-downey.com. You're on Instagram as well. what's the best way to find you and see what's coming, when it's coming?
Yeah, the website that you just said is great because that has, links to everything, and I'll keep things updated there. Or on Instagram, it's at Jordan Downey. Either of those, anything that is worth announcing, I will do so on those platforms.
Awesome. So hopefully you'll come back on again. We could talk about that new project. I will have watched The Headhunter by then. It wasn't on my tier of Amazon. And also it's so funny where I am right now. It's like my own little corner office here in the big living room. So my wife, who usually she'll be on the couch watching her terrible reality TV shows, and then we'll be here watching the most offensive horror movies ever. But we love each other. But Amazon's on that TV, and I can't watch horror on that TV when she's home. It freaks her out. What was I watching the other day? She's like, "What are you watching now?" And I'm like, "I'm watching Flesh Eating Mothers." And she just backed out of the room. I don't know if you remember that film.
I don't, but
I'm telling you, I find the most obscure of Flesh Eating Mothers. And I watched another one that it had to have been made for, you said Thankskilling was for $3,500. This had to be made for $35. The LA AIDS killer.
LA AIDS killer,
or the LA AIDS slasher or something. It was made in 1990, like the early 90s, and it's just horrible, but I love it. One of those things. So I told you I watch obscure stuff. So that's what made me initially find Thankskilling, but obviously you're kind of a name now. So Thankskilling or not, I'm looking forward to see what you have coming down the pike, Jordan. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I'll be excited to chat about all the new stuff next time and how Thankskilling, leads to these other avenues to come.
Right on. And I'll just end the episode like Thankskilling. Gobble, gobble, motherfucker. Until next time. Got to come back. I didn't do this. This is an extra piece. I didn't ask you about Guns N' Roses. This is how I can tie, my mothership podcast into the main podcast. So you were talking about You Could Be Mine before. And I want to ask you, and I'm going to start to make this a common question on these podcasts. What Guns N' Roses song would make for the best horror movie? So that's a two-part.
It's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that You Could Be Mine is my favorite of theirs, and it is because of the Terminator 2, the Terminator 2 music video and inspiration. I was telling you off the air how much that music video really kind of blew me away at the time, because, and it does something that I really miss that I don't think movies do anymore, is teaser trailers and sort of the where a movie would market through music, but they wouldn't just cut in scenes. It was they actually got Arnold in the costume with the glasses to walk through that club. And I remember reading this, listening to the story at one point about how James Cameron played. I think they were listening to a bunch of tapes. You might know the backstory of this more, but that he had considered Guns N' Roses was huge at the time, and they'd listened to some of the tapes of songs that were optional that they could include in the movie, and the band loved it. And so then when they got them together to get Arnold to do that scene, they were all for it. But I just loved the idea that they actually got him to go and be in that video, and also to sort of put as much money behind it and not just kind of scrape together some YouTube thing like it would be done now. So You Could Be Mine. I'm not sure how that would go dark and scary, but there's probably some sort of a You Could Be Mine, even beyond death sort of version that you could scrape together.
Yeah, it's kind of like a single white female, you could be mine, you can't be anyone else's, you could be mine. All right. Well, if you ever come up with a script for a GNR horror film, just use me as I don't have to be EP, get some sort of producer. I'll be a cable grip. I just want to be involved in a Guns N' Roses horror film, or work with you at some point later on. Yeah. Anyway, so that does it for this episode of Appetite for Horror. Until next time, fellas, gobble, gobble, motherfuckers.